The storm was the pack's fury given voice. Rain hammered against the grand oak trees surrounding the Moonshadow Pack's ceremonial grounds, a relentless, icy deluge that soaked through furs and extinguished the fire in the pit. The torches, their flames fighting a losing battle against the wind, cast long, frantic shadows that danced like demons across the faces of the gathered wolves. They stood in a wide, grim semicircle, a jury of peers whose verdict had already been delivered in hushed, angry tones long before this moment. In the center of it all, Alpha Rowan stood, a figure of imposing authority and cold fury. His grip on Elara's upper arm was like a vice, unyielding and bruising. She trembled, not just from the cold, but from a terror so profound it felt like a physical weight on her chest. Her dress, a simple linen shift, was plastered to her body, the fabric clinging to the pronounced swell of her pregnant belly. "You have brought a stain upon this pack, Elara," Rowan's voice boomed, cutting through the roar of the storm. It was a voice that had once whispered promises of love and a future as his Luna. Now, it was laced with nothing but contempt. "You stand there, swollen with a child, and expect me to believe it is of my blood? The timing reeks of deceit. It coincides too conveniently with my injury, with my period of weakness." Elara's tear-filled eyes searched his face, looking for any trace of the man who had claimed her under the full moon. "Rowan, he is yours. I have been faithful to you, my mate, in spirit, body, and soul. I swear it on the moon goddess herself. There has been no other. You are my destiny." From just behind Rowan, a figure stepped forward. Lyra, Elara's own sister. Her beauty was sharp, a weapon she wielded with precision. Where Elara's features were soft and kind, Lyra's were all angles and calculation. A smirk, carefully hidden from Rowan's view but perfectly visible to Elara, played on her lips. "Sister," Lyra began, her voice a silken, poisonous thing. "We all saw how close you grew to that strapping warrior from the Silvermane pack during the last gathering. What was his name? Ronan? You were with him for hours, walking in the woods. We thought you were simply being kind, perhaps gathering herbs for our injured Alpha. But now it seems your kindness had a different price." A low, collective growl rippled through the pack. The narrative, so carefully planted by Lyra, had taken root. Elara's eyes widened in horror, her gaze darting from Lyra's smug face to the hostile, believing eyes of the crowd. The betrayal was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. "It's a lie," Elara cried out, her voice cracking. "Lyra, why? Why are you doing this?" "He was showing me the Silvermane technique for healing deep muscle tears, for Rowan. That was all. I wanted to help you heal faster, my love." But Rowan's face was a mask of stone. Lyra's words had found fertile ground in the soil of his pride and insecurity. His injury had left him vulnerable, and the idea of his mate consorting with a warrior from a rival pack, even for healing, was an intolerable blow to his ego. "Enough," Rowan snarled, the sound feral and final. "Your lies only deepen your shame. The pack has heard the truth. They have seen your deceit. And I, Alpha Rowan, hereby reject you, Elara, as my mate and as the Luna of this pack." The words were not just spoken, they were unleashed. A searing, invisible pain, white-hot and agonizing, tore through Elara's very core. It was the mate bond, a sacred tether woven by the moon goddess, snapping like a rotten thread. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound of soul-deep agony, and stumbled, clutching her chest as if a vital organ had been ripped out. She fell to her knees in the churning mud, the cold filth a stark contrast to the fire in her veins. "Please," she whimpered, her voice a broken whisper lost in the wind. "My baby, please, he is our baby." Lyra leaned down, her smile sweet and venomous. "The forest will decide the fate of your baby." Rowan gave a sharp, merciless nod. Two massive pack warriors, Brennus and Cormac, their faces set in grim duty, stepped forward. They hauled Elara to her feet, her struggles weak and futile against their strength. "No, Rowan, don't do this, please," she screamed as they dragged her towards the oppressive, dark tree line of the whispering dark forest. "I love you. I've always loved only you." Her cries were swallowed by a clap of thunder and the rising jeers of the pack she had served, the people she had loved and healed. Her last, devastating sight was of Rowan turning his back on her, Lyra slipping her arm possessively through his, claiming her victory. The forest swallowed her whole. The moment she crossed the border, the sounds of the pack vanished, replaced by an oppressive, heavy silence broken only by the hammering rain and the creak of ancient trees. The air grew colder, the darkness so absolute it felt like a physical entity. Thorns and claw-like branches tore at her skin and her thin dress, leaving bloody scratches in their wake. She stumbled blindly, her body racked with sobs. The pain of the rejection was a constant, throbbing wound in her soul. But soon, a new, more urgent pain joined it. A deep, cramping spasm clenched her abdomen, so powerful it doubled her over and forced another cry from her lips. No, 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 no. Not now. Not here. The pack healer's words from just yesterday echoed in her mind. Any day now, Elara. The baby is ready. He is strong. Terror, colder than the rain, seized her. She was alone. No healer, no midwife, no comforting hand. Just the relentless storm and the hungry dark. She clutched her belly, feeling the hard, tight swell of another contraction building. I have to keep moving, she whispered to herself, to the baby. I have to find shelter. But the forest offered no shelter. It was a labyrinth of suffering. She slipped on a patch of mud, landing hard on her side, a sharp cry of pain and fear tearing from her throat. The contractions were coming closer together now, a relentless tide of agony. She knew the signs. Her time was imminent. As another wave of pain crashed over her, a long, low howl cut through the cacophony of the storm. It was unlike any wolf cry she had ever heard, deeper, older, filled with a profound and lonely power. It was a sound that spoke of forgotten realms and ancient sorrows. And it was close. A new scent filled the air, cutting through the petrichor and the smell of her own fear. It was wild, untamed, a mix of pine, frost, and raw, formidable power. It was the scent of a predator. A forbidden scent. The stories flooded back to her, whispers of the forbidden alpha, a wolf of immense power who lived in these woods, banished by all packs, a creature of myth and nightmare. Someone, something, was watching her. She could feel its gaze like a physical weight, piercing the darkness. She was no longer just a victim of the storm and labor, she was prey. Pushing herself up, she tried to run, to hide, but her body betrayed her. A contraction, the most powerful yet, seized her, and she screamed, the sound echoing through the trees before being swallowed by the night. She collapsed against the gnarled roots of a massive oak, her vision blurring, her strength utterly spent. The world began to fade at the edges, the cold seeping into her bones. As darkness claimed her, her final, coherent thought was a silent, desperate prayer to the moon goddess she felt had abandoned her. Save my baby? Consciousness returned to Elara in fleeting, pain-racked pulses. The world was a smear of darkness, rain, and agony. She was dimly aware of the cold ground beneath her, the relentless drumming of water on leaves, and the terrifying, primal knowledge that her body was no longer her own. It was a vessel being torn apart from the inside. Another contraction ripped through her, and a guttural moan escaped her lips. Her vision swam, dark spots dancing before her eyes. In one of these moments of semi-lucidity, she saw him. A shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows between the trees. It was a wolf, but of a magnitude she could scarcely comprehend. He was massive, larger than any pack alpha she had ever seen. His fur was the pure, absolute black of a moonless midnight. A pelt that seemed to drink the faint light around it. As a flash of lightning illuminated the forest, it gleamed like polished obsidian. And his eyes, they were not the gold or blue of ordinary wolves. They were silver, the color of a winter moon, ancient, intelligent, and filled with a chilling, untamed light. The forbidden alpha. He moved with a silent, predatory grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. Each step was deliberate, powerful. He circled her slowly, his silver eyes taking in her battered state, her swollen belly, the evidence of her desperate struggle. He was assessing her, a puzzle left on his territory. Elara's breath hitched. This was it. The stories said he killed any wolf who trespassed in his domain. She was too weak to fight, too broken to run. She could only wait for the end. But the end did not come. Instead, he stopped his circling and stood before her. The air crackled with his power. Then, in a fluid, mesmerizing motion, he began to shift. Bones realigned with muffled cracks, fur receded into smooth, tanned skin, and the massive wolf was replaced by a man. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with a build that spoke of raw, untamed power. Scars mapped a history of violence across his torso and arms, a long, silvery line across his ribs, a jagged mark on his shoulder. His face was all hard lines and sharp angles, weathered by time and solitude, yet it was breathtakingly handsome in a way that was as dangerous as it was compelling. His hair was as black as his fur, falling in wet waves around his face. And his eyes retained their piercing, moon-silver quality, regarding her with an intensity that felt like it could see into the deepest, most hidden parts of her soul. He knelt before her, his presence overwhelming. Elara expected a snarl, a threat, a killing blow. Instead, his voice, a low, gravelly growl that resonated deep within her, spoke words she never thought she would hear. "You're not dying here." It was not a promise of comfort, but a statement of fact. A decree. In that voice, she heard not malice, but a will of iron. Tears of relief, terror, and overwhelming pain mingled with the rain on her face. The last of her strength evaporated. The world was fading, the edges of her vision turning to black. As the darkness pulled her under, she used the final ounce of her will, her voice a mere whisper, a breath against the storm. "Save my baby?" Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped forward, into nothingness. But she did not hit the cold, muddy ground. She fell into a pair of strong, steady arms. Kale, the forbidden alpha, caught her effortlessly, lifting her limp, shivering form against his chest. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her damp hair brushing his jaw. He looked down at her face, pale and streaked with mud and tears, yet still holding a haunting beauty even in unconsciousness. He felt the frantic, struggling life within her belly, the baby fighting its own battle to enter a world that had already rejected it. A memory, long buried under layers of ice and grief, surfaced with the force of a tidal wave. Another woman, another child, a failure that had carved out his soul and left him hollow. The pain was as sharp and fresh as if it had happened yesterday. A low growl rumbled in his chest, but it was not directed at her. It was for the ones who had done this. For the alpha who would cast out his pregnant mate. For the pack that would allow it. Without another moment's hesitation, he turned and moved deeper into the forest, carrying his fragile burden with a care that belied his fearsome appearance. He moved through the treacherous terrain as if it were a well-tended garden, his path sure and swift. The forest, which had been a death trap for Elara, seemed to part for him, acknowledging its true master. He carried her to a place no other wolf had ever seen, a small, cleverly concealed cabin nestled in the heart of a protective ring of ancient thorns and ironwood trees. It was a sanctuary he had built with his own hands, a fortress of solitude. Until now, he pushed the heavy wooden door open and carried her inside, into the warmth and stillness. The cabin was Spartan but sturdy, with a fireplace emitting a warm glow, and thick furs piled on a large bed. He laid her gently on the furs, her wet dress soaking into the softness. He stood over her for a long moment, his silver eyes tracing the lines of her face, the curve of her belly. The ghost of his past stood beside him, a silent, accusing shade. But for the first time in a century, the ghost did not speak of his failure. It whispered of a second chance. He had saved her from the storm. But the storm of birth was yet to come. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that the storm of her past would soon follow. He built up the fire, the flames reflecting in his determined eyes. He was ready for them all. Consciousness returned to Elara slowly, like a gentle tide washing over a battered shore. The first thing she was aware of was warmth. A deep, penetrating warmth that soothed her chilled bones. The second was silence. The relentless hammering of the rain was now a distant, muffled drumming against a sturdy roof. The third was the scent, wood smoke, dried herbs, and the clean, masculine scent of pine and wild earth. Her eyes fluttered open. She was lying on a bed of incredibly soft, thick furs. A rough-hewn wooden ceiling swam into focus above her. She was inside, sheltered, Panic, a conditioned reflex, jolted through her. Where was she? Where was her baby? Her hands fell to her stomach. It was flatter, soft, empty. A cry of pure terror caught in her throat. But then, a tiny, mewling sound, like the softest of kittens, came from beside her. She turned her head, her heart pounding against her ribs. There, swaddled in a clean, soft blanket, was a baby. A perfect, beautiful baby with a shock of dark hair and eyes that, in the firelight, seemed to be a deep, newborn blue. Her daughter. Alive. Tears of overwhelming relief and joy welled in her eyes. She reached out a trembling hand and gently touched the baby's cheek. The infant stirred, her tiny mouth working, and she let out another soft sound. "She's been fed," a low, gravelly voice said from the corner of the room. "Goat's milk." She took it well. Elara's head snapped towards the voice. There, sitting in a heavy wooden chair, carved from a single massive log, was the man from the forest. Kale, the forbidden alpha. He was shirtless, his scarred, powerful torso on full display. He held a sharpening stone in one hand and a long, wicked-looking hunting knife in the other. He wasn't looking at her, his focus was on the methodical, whispering scrape of stone against steel. In the steady light of the cabin, he was even more formidable. The scars told stories of brutal battles survived. The muscles coiled under his skin spoke of strength that could tear a tree from its roots. Yet, the hands that held the knife were steady, precise. The same hands that had carried her to safety. "You?" Elara whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse and screaming. "You saved us." It wasn't a question, but a statement of awe. The most feared creature in all the territories had done what her own mate, her own pack, had refused to do. Kale didn't respond immediately. He finished a long, slow pass of the stone along the blade, then set both down on a small table beside him. Finally, his silver eyes lifted and met hers. They were as cold and distant as the moon, but she saw no malice in them. Only a deep, bottomless reserve of pain. "You are in my territory," he said, his voice flat. "No one dies here without my permission." It was a harsh statement, but Elara sensed it was a facade. He had not given her permission to die. He had actively intervened. She tried to sit up, wincing as a dull, aching soreness flared through her entire body, a stark reminder of the trauma of childbirth. "The birth? I don't remember. You were unconscious for most of it," he stated, standing up and walking to the fireplace. He picked up a clay mug and brought it to her. "Drink. It will help with the pain and your milk." She took the mug. The liquid inside was a bitter-smelling tea. She trusted him. She had no choice, but more than that, she felt an instinctive certainty that he meant her no harm. She drank, the warm liquid soothing her raw throat. "Why?" she asked, her voice a little stronger. She looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering. "Why did you save me? You could have left me. You could have killed me. The stories they tell about you." A shadow crossed his face. He turned away from her, staring into the flickering flames as if they held the answers to questions older than the forest itself. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the baby. "Because once," he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper, yet it seemed to vibrate through the very logs of the cabin, "no one saved my mate." The words hung in the air, simple, stark, and devastating. In that single sentence, Elara understood everything. The solitude, the coldness, the pain in his eyes that was deeper than the night. He wasn't just a monster from a story. He was a man who had loved and lost. A man who had failed to protect what was most precious to him. Her heart ached for him, this fearsome, broken king of the wild. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words inadequate. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a clear signal that the topic was closed. "Rest. Your body needs to heal. The child needs you to be strong." He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "My name is Kale. I am Alpha of no pack. This cabin is safe. No one from your old life can find it." Then he was gone, slipping outside into the storm, leaving Elara alone with her thoughts and her sleeping daughter. She looked down at the baby, at the perfect little face, and then around the simple, sturdy cabin. It was not the Luna's quarters she had been promised. There were no silks, no adoring pack members. But it was safe. It was warm, and the man who protected it, for all his gruffness and pain, had shown her more kindness in a few hours than her own mate had in the final months. She named her daughter Lyra, not after her traitorous sister, but for the small, bright star of hope she had become in this vast, dark wilderness. Cradling little Lyra to her chest, Elara felt a new, fragile seed of hope take root in her own shattered heart. She was abandoned, but she was not alone. She was rejected, but she was protected. And for now, that was enough. The memory of the birth returned to Elara in disjointed, pain-filled flashes, like shards of a terrifying dream. It had happened shortly after Cale brought her to the cabin, while she was still drifting in and out of consciousness. She remembered a blinding, tearing agony that pulled her from the depths of oblivion. A scream was ripped from her throat, raw and desperate. The world was a haze of firelight and shadow, and the only solid thing was the crushing pressure in our womb. "It's coming," she had cried out to the empty cabin, believing herself alone. But she wasn't. A dark shape moved into her line of sight. Cale. His face was grim, but his eyes, those silver moons, were calm and focused. He had rolled up the sleeves of his tunic, his powerful forearms bared. "The baby is crowning," he said, his voice a steady anchor in her sea of panic. "You need to push." "I can't," she sobbed, her body trembling uncontrollably. She was terrified. This was not how it was supposed to be. There should be a healer, her mother, her mate, not this fearsome, banished stranger. "I'm too weak." Another contraction seized her, a vice of pure fire. She arched her back, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Cale didn't flinch. He moved closer, kneeling beside the bed of furs. He didn't touch her yet, but his presence was a command. "You are not weak," he growled, the sound low and resonant. "You have survived betrayal in the forest. You will survive this. Your daughter needs you to fight for her. Now, push." His words were not gentle, but they were exactly what she needed. They sparked a defiant ember in her soul. She would not die here. She would not let her daughter die. With a guttural cry that tore from the very core of her being, she bore down, channeling all her pain, her fear, and her rage into the effort. "Good." Cale's voice was closer now. Again. He was there, his hands guiding, supporting. She remembered the feel of his touch, surprisingly gentle, yet firm and sure. He was not a trained midwife, but he possessed an innate, primal understanding of life and death. He spoke to her in that low, steady rumble, his voice a tether keeping her from floating away into the pain. "You are strong, Elara. Stronger than they knew. Stronger than you know." Another memory flash. Cale, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands cradling the baby's head as it emerged. There was no disgust, no hesitation on his face. Only a profound, intense focus. He was wholly invested in this battle for life. "One more," he urged, his eyes locking with hers. "All your strength. For her." Elara gathered the last dregs of her will, a final reservoir of strength she didn't know she possessed. With a scream that felt like it ripped her soul in two, she pushed. And then, the pressure was gone. The unbearable tension vanished, replaced by a sudden, shocking emptiness. A moment of silence, thick and heavy, filled the cabin. And then, a sound. A thin, wavering, indignant cry. Tears streamed down Elara's face, mingling with the sweat. She collapsed back onto the furs, utterly spent, her body trembling with aftershocks. She watched, her vision blurred, as Cale handled her newborn with a breathtaking efficiency and care. He cleared the baby's airway. With a piece of clean cloth, his movements swift and precise. He used a length of sinew and a sharp knife to tie and cut the umbilical cord. Then, he took the squirming, blood-smeared infant to a basin of warm water she hadn't even noticed he'd prepared, and with a surprising tenderness, he washed her clean. He worked in silence, his large, scarred hands making the tiny baby seem even more fragile. Yet, in his grasp, she was safe. When she was clean, he wrapped her snugly in a warm, soft blanket, swaddling her with an expertise that spoke of a past he never discussed. He turned and placed the bundled infant into Elara's waiting, trembling arms. "She's perfect," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. And she was. She had a full head of dark hair, 10 tiny fingers and 10 tiny toes, and her cries were the most beautiful sound Elara had ever heard. She was alive. They both were. Elara sobbed, holding her daughter close, breathing in her sweet, new scent. She looked up at Kale, who stood watching them, his expression unreadable. "Thank you," she whispered, the words overflowing with a gratitude that was too vast for language. "Thank you, Alpha Kale." He gave a single, curt nod. But in his eyes, she saw something shift. The ice seemed to crack, just a little. He had not just saved a stranger in the woods. He had helped bring a new life into the world. He had participated in a miracle. And in doing so, a part of his own frozen heart had begun, ever so slightly, to thaw. He moved away then, to stoke the fire and clean up, giving her privacy to bond with her child. Elara held little Lyra, studying every feature, counting every finger. The traumatic memory of the birth was already being overridden by the overwhelming love she felt. And woven into that memory was the steady, powerful presence of the Shadow Alpha, the unlikely midwife who had stood as her sole protector in the most vulnerable moment of her life. The bond forged in that cabin was not one of mere gratitude, it was something far deeper, something forged in blood, pain, and the shared, sacred joy of new life. Days bled into a week, a fragile, peaceful rhythm establishing itself within the confines of the cabin. Elara's body healed with the remarkable speed of their kind, aided by Kale's knowledge of medicinal herbs and the nourishing stews he prepared from his hunts. Little Lyra thrived, her cries growing stronger, her eyes beginning to focus. Elara found herself watching Kale. The fearsome alpha was a study in contradictions. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator, yet he could be impossibly gentle when handing Elara a mug of tea or when his silver gaze fell upon the sleeping baby. He spoke little, his silence a palpable presence in the cabin, but Elara no longer found it intimidating. It was a comfortable, shared quiet. She was sitting by the fire, nursing Lyra, when Kale, who had been sharpening his weapons by the window, went perfectly still. It wasn't a casual stillness, it was the absolute, frozen alertness of a wolf that has caught a dangerous scent. His head was tilted, his nostrils flared slightly, his entire body thrumming with a sudden, coiled tension. Elara's heart stuttered. "What is it?" His eyes, when they met hers, had shifted from silver to a stormy, dangerous gray. "Someone is coming." The peace of the cabin shattered. Fear, cold and familiar, slithered down Elara's spine. She clutched Lyra closer, the baby sensing her mother's distress and letting out a small, fretful sound. "How many?" Elara whispered, her voice trembling. "A hunting party. 5, maybe 6. His voice was a low growl. He stood up, his movements fluid and deadly. He walked to the door, not with panic, but with the deliberate purpose of a general going to war. "The wind carries their stench." Moonshadow. Rowan. He had come for them. Not to take her back, she knew. To eliminate the problem. To erase the evidence of his shame and his mate's supposed infidelity. To kill her child. Terror turned her blood to ice. She looked from her vulnerable baby to the formidable man at the door. "Kale?" He turned to look at her, and in his eyes, she saw no fear. Only a cold, burning certainty. "Stay inside," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Do not come out, no matter what you hear." He opened the door just enough to slip through, the gray afternoon light slicing into the warm cabin before the door shut, plunging her back into the firelit gloom. The lock, a heavy wooden bolt, slid into place with a solid, final thud. Elara scrambled to the window, peering through a small gap in the heavy shutters. Outside, in the clearing before the cabin, Kale stood alone. He didn't shift, not yet. He simply waited, a solitary sentinel, as 5 large wolves emerged from the tree line. They were led by Brennus, the warrior who had dragged her to the forest. Their lips were pulled back in snarls, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Brennus shifted, his human form bristling with aggression. "The banished one," he sneered. "The alpha of nothing. Hand over the whore and her bastard, and we might let you live." From inside the cabin, Elara flinched at the words, holding Lyra so tightly the baby squirmed. Kale didn't respond with words. A low, rumbling growl started deep in his chest, a sound so primal it seemed to vibrate through the very ground. It was a promise of violence. A declaration of war. She and the child are under my protection. Kale's voice was deceptively calm, but it carried like the crack of ice on AF. Rosin Lake. Leave now, and you will keep your lives. Brennus laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You think you can take on all of us, old wolf? Kale's lips curled into a smirk that held no humor. I don't think. I know. Then, he moved. It wasn't a shift, it was an explosion. One moment he was a man, the next, the massive, terrifying black wolf with eyes of burning silver filled the space where he had stood. The air itself seemed to bow to his presence. The battle was not a fight, it was a slaughter. Kale was a whirlwind of midnight fur and razor-sharp teeth. He moved with a speed that was blinding, his power absolute. He didn't just fight them, he dismantled them. A snap of his jaws broke a leg. A swipe of his paw shattered ribs. He used their numbers against them, herding them into each other, his movements a brutal, beautiful dance of death. Elara watched, her hand clamped over her mouth, torn between horror and a fierce, blazing pride. This was the power that protected her. This was the fury that defended her child. Within minutes, it was over. 4 wolves lay whimpering or unconscious in the mud. Brennus, his arm hanging at a grotesque angle, was backing away, his face a mask of terror and pain. Kale, his black fur matted with the blood of his enemies, took a step forward and let out a roar that was louder than thunder. It was a sound of pure, untamed dominance that shook the trees and echoed through the mountains. It was a message, not just to the defeated warriors, but to the entire forest, to Rowan waiting in the distance. This is my territory. These are my people. Come again, and you will not leave. Brennus and his surviving packmates, those who could still move, turned and fled, tails between their legs, their whimpers fading into the forest. Kale stood panting in the center of the clearing, a king surveying his domain. Then, he turned his great head and his silver eyes met Elara's through the crack in the shutter. In their depths, she saw the storm begin to recede, replaced by the same fierce, protective certainty that had been there from the beginning. He had not just won a battle. He had drawn a line in the earth, and on her side of it, she and her daughter were safe. The hunted had become the protected. And the hunter had just been put on notice. The silence that fell after the retreat of Brennus and his warriors was profound. It was the silence of aftermath, thick with the scent of blood, rain, and spent adrenaline. Elara remained frozen at the window, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched as Kale's massive form shifted back into his human shape. The transition was just as fluid, but now she could see the cost. Fresh, bleeding gashes marred his torso and arms, a testament to the ferocity of T. He brief, brutal fight. He stood for a moment, his chest heaving, his head bowed as the rain washed the blood from his skin, mingling it with the mud at his feet. He was a terrifying sight. A primal god of war standing amidst the wreckage of his enemies. Yet all Elara felt was a surge of profound, overwhelming gratitude. He had stood alone against 5 and had not just survived, he had triumphed absolutely. He turned and walked back to the cabin. Elara scrambled away from the window, settling back onto the furs with Lyra just as the heavy wooden bolt slid back and the door opened. Kale stepped inside, bringing with him the chill of the outside and the metallic tang of blood. He moved to the basin of water in the corner, his movements slightly stiffer than usual. He began to wash the blood from his wounds, his back to her. Elara's maternal instincts, so recently focused entirely on her newborn, now extended to this wounded warrior. She carefully laid a sleeping Lyra in a makeshift crib Kale had carved from a hollowed-out log and padded with furs. Then, she stood, her legs still a little weak, and approached him. "Let me," she said softly. He tensed, a flicker of surprise in his silver eyes as he glanced over his shoulder at her. He was not used to being tended to. "It's not necessary," he grunted, continuing to dab at a deep gash on his bicep. "Please," she insisted, her voice firm. "You fought for us. Let me do this for you." He hesitated for a long moment, then gave a curt nod, stepping back from the basin. Elara took a clean cloth, dipped it in the water, and began to gently clean the wounds on his back. He flinched slightly at her touch, but then stood perfectly still, his muscles rigid under her hands. The silence stretched as she worked, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was charged with something new, something unspoken. She was acutely aware of the sheer power of his body, of the heat radiating from his skin, of the stories told by each and every scar. "You risked your life for us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Why? You don't even know us." Cale was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. He stared into the fire, his profile stark and beautiful in the flickering light. "I told you," he finally said, his voice low. "No one saved my mate. This is more than that," Elara pressed gently, moving to clean the wound on his arm. "This is standing against a pack. This is drawing their wrath onto yourself. For a stranger." He turned his head, his silver gaze capturing hers. The intensity of it stole her breath. "You stopped being a stranger the moment I carried you into this cabin," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "That child stopped being a stranger the moment I helped her into His world." He looked away, back into the flames, as if the admission had cost him something. "Because no mother and child should be abandoned to the dark. Because you deserve protection. Not for any other reason." But Elara sensed there was another reason. A reason that was growing with every passing moment they spent in this cabin, with every quiet look, with every shared silence. Her heart trembled, not with fear, but with a feeling so foreign she barely recognized it. For the first time since Rowan's rejection, since her world had been torn apart, she felt not just safe, but seen. She was not just a disgraced she-wolf. She was Elara, a woman this formidable alpha had chosen to defend with his very life. She finished cleaning his wounds and found a poultice of crushed herbs he kept in a jar, applying it to the deepest cuts. Her touch was gentle, reverent. "Thank you, Cale," she said, her hand resting for a moment on his scarred shoulder. He didn't pull away. He simply nodded, the gesture holding a weight of understanding that went beyond words. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of the battle he had fought for them, Elara knew a fundamental truth had shifted. She was no longer a victim seeking refuge. She was under the protection of the most powerful wolf in the forest, and that protection felt less like a shield and more like a claim. And a part of her, a part she had thought died in the mud outside her pack's territory, was beginning to hope that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of it. The days that followed the first attack were tense, a quiet waiting game. Cale was constantly on alert, his senses stretched to their limits, patrolling the invisible boundaries of his territory. Elara watched him, her gratitude slowly blossoming into something deeper, more complex. It was a mixture of awe, dependency, and a dawning, terrifying affection. He was so different from Rowan. Rowan's strength had been a performance, a display for the pack. Cale's strength was as intrinsic as the mountain itself, quiet, unyielding, and absolute. He didn't speak of honor, he lived it. He didn't demand respect, he commanded it by simply existing. One evening, after Lyra had been fed and was sleeping soundly, Elara found Cale sitting on the porch of the cabin, staring out at the moon-washed forest. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. She hesitated for a moment before stepping out and sitting beside him on the rough-hewn bench. He didn't acknowledge her, but his posture shifted slightly, an unconscious acknowledgement of her presence. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the moon climb higher in the sky. It was a comfortable silence, one that had become their native language. "What was he? Our name?" Elara asked softly, her voice barely disturbing the night. Cale went very still. He knew who she meant. The ghost that lived in the shadows of his eyes. "Seraphine," he said after a long pause. The name was a whisper, a prayer, a curse. Her name was Seraphine. Elara waited, giving him the space to continue, if he wished. "She was light," he said, the words seeming to be pulled from a deep, locked vault within him. "Where I was darkness, she was dawn. She was gentle, but with a spirit of fire. She could calm my storms with a single touch." He picked up a twig, snapping it absently between his fingers. "We were young, reckless. I was the rising alpha of the Stormfang pack. We were challenging the old ways, growing too powerful too fast. The other packs grew fearful. They saw my ambition as a threat." He fell silent again, the memory a palpable pain in the air between them. "They came for us one night. An alliance of 3 packs, led by a cunning, vicious alpha named Vorlon. They didn't challenge me directly. They waited until I was away, settling a border dispute. His voice grew hard, edged with a self-loathing that had festered for a century. They attacked the heart of our village. They targeted the expectant mothers. Elara's breath caught. Expectant mothers. Seraphine was 8 months pregnant with our son. Kale's voice was now a hollow shell. She tried to defend the others. She was a warrior in her own right. But she was overwhelmed. When I returned, the village was in ashes. I found her. I found them both in the ruins of our home. She had fought to her last breath to protect our child. The devastation in his words was absolute. Elara felt tears well in her own eyes, imagining the scene, the pain, the loss. It was a pain that mirrored her own, yet was infinitely worse. I hunted them down, Kale continued, his tone flat, dead. Vorlon and his allies. I didn't just kill them. I erased them. I became the monster they feared I was. I bathed the forests in their blood until no pack would have me. Until I was banished, cursed, a story to frighten pups. The forbidden alpha. He looked at her then, his silver eyes blazing with ancient grief. So you see, when I found you in the forest, bleeding, abandoned, it was like seeing a ghost. A second chance I never asked for and do not deserve. But I will be damned to the darkest hell before I let history repeat itself. No mother, no child, not while I draw breath. Elara reached out, her hand covering his where it rested on his knee. His skin was warm, his knuckles scarred. He flinched at the contact, but he did not pull away. You are not that monster, Kale, she said, her voice fierce with conviction. A monster would have left me to die. A monster would not have helped me bring my daughter into the world. You saved us. You are protecting us. You are a better alpha, a better man, than any of those who cast you out. Her words seemed to strike a chord deep within him. The hard line of his jaw softened, just a fraction. He looked down at her hand on his, then back up at her face, his gaze searching, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. When I am with you, he said, his voice rough with emotion, the ghosts are quieter. Elara's heart swelled, aching with a tenderness so profound it stole her breath. In that moment, under the watchful moon, the last of her fear melted away. The bond between them was no longer just one of protector and protected, or of 2 wounded souls seeking solace. It was something else entirely. Something that felt an awful lot like the beginning of a love that could heal a century of pain. She didn't say anything. She simply leaned her head against his shoulder, and together, they sat in the moonlight, 2 lost souls who had somehow, against all odds, found their way home. A new energy hummed between them after the night on the porch. The cabin was no longer just a hiding place, it was a sanctuary where something beautiful and fragile was taking root. Elara found herself smiling more, humming old lullabies to Lyra, her spirit feeling lighter than it had in years. Kale, too, seemed changed. The perpetual shadow in his eyes began to lift, replaced by a quiet, watchful warmth when he looked at her and the baby. He started speaking more, telling her about the forest, the habits of the animals, the secrets of the plants. He was slowly sharing his world with her. One night, a few days later, the moon was full and brilliant, its silver light pouring through the cabin windows like a liquid blessing. Lyra was asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Elara was stirring a pot of stew over the fire when Kale stood up from his chair. He moved to the crib and stood looking down at the sleeping infant for a long, silent moment. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of awe, pain, and a dawning, fierce determination. Then, he did something that stopped Elara's breath. He placed his large, scarred hand gently over Lyra's tiny chest, covering her entire torso. It was a gesture of immense power and profound tenderness. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but it resonated with a primal, magical authority that seemed to still the very air in the room. It was not a request. It was a vow, spoken to the universe, to the moon goddess, to any force that would dare threaten them. This child is under my protection, he declared, his words ringing with absolute finality. Her blood is pack. Her life is mine to defend. By my blood and by my breath, I claim her as my own. Anyone who tr. I ease to harm her. Anyone who seeks to take her from this place will die by my fangs. This is my vow." The air crackled. Elara felt the power of the vow ripple through her, a tangible, magical seal settling over her daughter. It was an alpha's claim, the most sacred pledge a wolf could make. Rowan had rejected his own flesh and blood. Kale was claiming a child not his own with a ferocity that shook the foundations of the world. Tears filled Elara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of a love so overwhelming it was terrifying. Kale lifted his hand from Lyra and turned to Elara. His silver eyes were blazing, no longer with the cold light of the moon, but with the fire of a supernova. "Why?" Elara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Why do you care so much? Why would you bind yourself to us like this?" He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping so close she could feel the heat from his body, could see the flecks of storm gray in his silver irises. "Because when I saw you in the forest," he said, his voice a raw, husky whisper, "something inside me, something I thought had died with Seraphine, woke up again. It wasn't just pity. It wasn't just atonement. It was a recognition." He lifted a hand, his fingers hovering just beside her cheek, not quite touching her. "You are not her. You are Elara. You have a fire in you that refused to be extinguished. You have a strength that humbles me. And this child, she is a part of you. She is innocence and hope, and she deserves a father who would burn the world for her." Elara's heartbeat stumbled, tripping over itself. She leaned into his touch, her cheek meeting his palm. His skin was rough, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "Kale," she breathed his name, a prayer, an answer. "Let me protect you," he murmured, his forehead leaning against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "Not as a duty, not as a penance. Let me protect you because you are mine to protect. Both of you. Stay. Be my family." It was everything she had never known she wanted. It was a future she had never dared to dream of. She looked into the eyes of the forbidden alpha, the monster, the savior, the man, and she saw her future. She saw her mate. "Yes," she whispered. And as the full moon shone down upon them, sealing his vow, Kale, the shadow alpha, finally closed the last inch between them and claimed her lips with his, in a kiss that was not just a promise, but a beginning. The peace that followed Kale's claim was deep and resonant, but it was the calm before the storm. They all felt it, a building pressure in the air, a tension in the forest that spoke of an approaching conflict. Kale's vow had been a challenge, and a wolf like Rowan could not let a challenge go unanswered. 2 days later, the storm broke. Kale was outside, teaching Elara how to set a snare for rabbits, when his head snapped up. His entire body went rigid. This time, the scent on the wind was not that of a small hunting party. It was the scent of an army. Moss, pine, and the distinct, aggressive signature of the entire Moonshadow warband. "Get inside." Now, Kale's voice was lethally calm. Elara's blood ran cold. She scooped up Lyra from a blanket on the grass and ran for the cabin, her heart in her throat. She bolted the door and rushed to the window. Emerging from the tree line were at least 30 wolves, led by Alpha Rowan in his magnificent, tawny-furred wolf form. Beside him, in her sleek, silver wolf form, was Lyra, her eyes glowing with vicious triumph. They had come in force, determined to wipe out the insult to their alpha's pride once and for all. Rowan shifted, his face a mask of arrogant fury. "Forbidden one," he shouted, his voice echoing through the clearing. "Your time is over. The girl and that bastard child belong to me. Hand them over, and your death will be swift." Kale stood alone before them, a solitary mountain against a tidal wave. He didn't shift. He simply folded his arms, a smirk of pure, unadulterated contempt on his face. "You threw them away," Kale's voice, though not loud, carried with chilling clarity, silencing the growls of the pack. "You cast them out to die. You have no claim here. They belong to no one." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Then, his silver eyes found Elara's through the window for a split second, and his voice dropped, filled with a possessive, loving certainty that was more powerful than any roar. "But I choose them." The words were a declaration of war more potent than any battle cry. With a roar of pure rage, Rowan shifted back into his wolf form and launched himself forward, his entire pack surging behind him like a living avalanche. And Kale met them. He shifted in a blast of dark energy, his massive black wolf form seeming to grow even larger, a demon-given flesh. The roar that tore from his throat was louder than thunder, a sound of such primal, earth-shaking power that the first line of attacking wolves faltered. The battle that ensued was cataclysmic. It was not the controlled dismantling of the first fight. This was chaos. This was a whirlwind of fang and claw, a symphony of snarls and screams. Kale was a force of nature, a hurricane of destruction. He moved through them like a scythe through wheat, a blur of midnight and silver. He fought with the strength of 100 wolves, with the fury of a man who had already lost one family and would be damned before he lost another. Elara watched, her hands pressed against the window frame, her knuckles white. She saw Rowan, cunning and ruthless, trying to flank Kale, to attack from behind. She saw Lyra, slinking through the fray, aiming not for Kale, but for the cabin door. No, Elara whispered, her fear transforming into a cold, sharp rage. She was not a helpless victim anymore. She was a mother, claimed and protected by an alpha. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and stood guard by the door, her own wolf stirring within her, ready to fight for her child. Outside, Kale saw Lyra's move. With a powerful swipe of his paw, he sent 2 wolves flying and lunged, intercepting her just feet from the porch. He pinned her with a single, crushing paw on her back, his jaws closing around her neck. A warning squeeze, drawing blood but not killing, before he flung her aside like a rag doll. Her whimper was a satisfying sound. Then he turned his full attention to Rowan. The 2 alphas clashed in the center of the clearing, a titanic struggle of opposing forces. Light against dark, pride against power, deceit against devotion. They were a matched pair in strength, but Kale had something Rowan did not. He had a cause worth dying for. He had a family to return to. With a final, monumental surge of strength, Kale overpowered Rowan, slamming the tawny wolf to the ground. He planted his massive paws on Rowan's chest, his full weight crushing the other alpha, and lowered his head, his deadly fangs inches from Rowan's exposed throat. The entire forest fell silent. The Moonshadow Pack watched, frozen, their alpha defeated. Kale's voice was a low, guttural growl, a sound from the dawn of time. You are beaten, pup. Your pack sees your weakness. Your lies are laid bare. He leaned closer, his hot breath fogging in the air. Listen to me, and listen well. They are mine. Elara is mine. The child is mine. If you ever come near my territory again, if you ever even think of them again, I will not be so merciful. I will tear out your throat and feed your heart to the crows. Now, get out of my sight. He stepped back, releasing Rowan. The humiliation was worse than any physical injury. Rowan shifted back to his human form, his face pale with shock and shame. He couldn't meet the eyes of his pack. He looked at the cabin, where Elara stood tall and unafraid in the doorway, then at the terrifying alpha who had so utterly defeated him. With a strangled cry of rage and defeat, Rowan turned and fled into the forest, his pack scattering after him, a broken, leaderless mob. Lyra, clutching her bleeding neck, cast one last, hate-filled look at the cabin before she too disappeared into the trees. Kale stood panting in the center of the clearing, his black fur matted with blood and dirt, his body heaving with exertion. He was wounded, but he was victorious. He had not just defended his territory, he had defended his family. He had secured their future. As the dust settled, he turned and looked at Elara. And for the first time, he smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it transformed his entire face, lighting his silver eyes from within. The Shadow Alpha had fought his final battle. And he had won. Weeks turned into a month, and the memory of the great battle began to fade, replaced by the gentle, steady rhythm of their new life. The forest was peaceful once more, the animals returning, the air clean and sweet. The cabin was no longer a fortress, it was a home. Elara's body was fully healed, her spirit vibrant and strong. Little Lyra was growing plump and happy, her gurgles and coos filling the cabin with music. She had Kale's silver eyes, a fact that filled Elara with a secret, fierce joy. On a morning washed clean by a passing shower, Elara walked outside, Lyra cradled in her arms. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, its warm rays drying the dew from the grass. She breathed in the fresh, pine-scented air, feeling a contentment so profound it was almost a physical sensation. The door to the cabin opened and Cale stepped out. He came to stand beside her, his presence a solid, comforting warmth. He had shed the last of his solitary tension. He looked at peace. He looked down at Lyra, his expression soft, then his gaze lifted to Elara. The love in his eyes was so open, so unguarded, it made her breath catch. "Elara," he began, his voice quiet but sure. "I have spent a century in the shadows, believing my heart was a tomb. You and this child, you brought me into the light." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. "Stay. Not because you need a protector. Not because you have nowhere else to go." He took a deep breath, his silver eyes holding hers captive. "Stay because I am in love with you. Stay because I want to build a life with you. I want to be a father to Lyra. I want to be your mate. In every way, I want a family with you." Tears of pure, unadulterated happiness streamed down Elara's face. This was the promise the moon goddess had intended for her all along. Not the shallow, performative love of Rowan, but this deep, abiding, fierce devotion. This was a love that had been forged in fire and hardship, a love that had been chosen, not dictated by fate. She smiled, a radiant, joyful smile that reached the very depths of her soul. She didn't need to think about her answer. It had been written in the stars the moment he caught her in the forest. "Cale," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We already are a family." She gently placed their daughter into his waiting arms. He held Lyra with a natural, easy confidence, the tiny baby looking even smaller against his broad chest. The sight of the fearsome alpha cradling the infant with such tender care was the most beautiful thing Elara had ever seen. She reached up, her hand sliding behind his neck, and pulled him down to her. Their lips met in a kiss that was a seal on their vows, a promise of 1,000 tomorrows. It was a kiss of healing, of passion, of a love that had conquered past, pain, and darkness. As the sun fully crested the horizon, bathing them in its golden light, they stood together, the abandoned she-wolf, the banished alpha, and the child who had brought them together. They were no longer defined by what had been done to them, but by what they had chosen to become. A new pack, a new beginning, a family, chosen, loved, and protected for all their days.